very much for everyone who's arrived. Now tonight's expert talk is by Lorna Steele, and Lorna works for Highland Archive. Archive. What's the actual title, Lorna?
Highland Archive Service.
Sorry, yeah, Highland Archive Service. And she'll tell you all about it, but it's a great resource, and it's got some lovely buildings as well, Lorna. I've been to the centre in Bach. Is it Bacht? On the Bacht,
yeah,
in Inverness. Yeah, is that where you work, Lorna?
It's where I'm usually based. Yeah. Apart when I'm not in my office at home.
Yeah, great. So I'm just going to hand over to Lorna. So just going to tell us a little about the service and some of the stories that have arisen as a result of it. That some of the things that they've got on their books. So if I can ask you all just for this portion to mute yourself again, that would be wonderful. And I'll pass over to Lorna. Thank you very much, Lorna.
Thank you. So I should be able to share my screen perfectly smoothly, she says, hopefully.
Oh yeah, great.
Okay. Now, can you see that?
I can, yeah. It'd be really nice, Lorna, if we could see your face as well. And I'm not sure if you've.
I don't know if I can do that. Two seconds. Let me see if I can do that.
Maybe I can ask you to do that. Hang on. Let me see.
Let me stop sharing my screen for a second and see if I can override that. I think my gut feeling is it automatically turns my face off when I share my screen.
Right. Okay. If that's the case, then that's all right.
So I will smile cheerfully now and then again afterwards.
Yeah, we remember that. You remember your lovely countenance.
Okay.
Great.
Have you got that now? You can see the presentation.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Okay, so my name is Lorna Steele, as Pauline said. I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Highland Archive Service. And I thought what I would do for this was tell you a little bit about what the service is, what we do. Some people are really familiar with archives, some people are not at all. So a little bit about that and some of the collections that we hold and the sort of things we do with them. So this is just a little insight into where we came from. As Pauline said, we have some beautiful buildings now, and I'll show you them in a second. But in 1990, the Highland Regional Council established a record office. And so from 1992 onwards, the service was based in Inverness Library. And this was the extent of the space we had. So we had the two tables that you can see there, and that was it. The desk that is just out of view that you can see on the left-hand side is where the staff sat. So not a lot of space, and the documents out on public view. But then in 1995, we opened a discrete office in Caithness for the Caithness Archives. In 2008, Lochaber Archive Centre opened. And then in 2009, both Skye Lochaber Archive Centre and the Highland Archive Centre opened. So we were able to really give a much better service to the Highland area. The Highlands covers a third of Scotland, so a substantial area for us to cover. And so now we have these four beautiful buildings. And up on the top left-hand side is the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. To give you a bit of an idea of the proportions, the terracotta section of the building is where our records are kept. About 6 miles of shelving in that part of the building. Wow. And then the other part of it, the kind of office-looking bit, is where the offices and the public access are. So that's the relative importance of the collections to the staff, space-wise.
Yeah.
And this houses the historic records for the counties of Inverness-shire, Ross and Cromarty, Sutherland and Nairnshire. On the right-hand side at the top is Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives. This houses the historic records for the county of Caithness, but will also soon hold all the records, nuclear records for Great Britain. And it's a high-flying and state-of-the-art building. As you can see, it looks a little bit like it's landed from space.
Yeah, that's great.
And then down on the bottom right-hand side, you can see Skye and Lochailse Archive Centre, a much less dramatic building, but a really well-loved building locally. It's part of the Elgin Hostel complex, so it sits next to the high school, next to the leisure centre and the library. And then on the left-hand side at the bottom, Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William. Now, all of them hold records that relate to the Highland Council and the predecessors of the Highland Council, but also they all hold private collections. So we all hold family and estate papers, we all hold photographic collections, all sorts of documents that tell all sorts of stories of people. All of our buildings have archive strong rooms, so all of the documents that we look after are kept in the right conditions. They're temperature controlled. They have all sorts of high-flying tech in them to make sure that the documents are kept at the right temperature and the right humidity. And they also all have public search rooms, which maybe doesn't sound like a big deal, but there's a lot of archive centres that just don't have the capacity to be able to do that, to have people in. And in normal times, people don't need appointments to come in, which is a great thing in the archive world. Obviously, at the moment, things are a little bit different. So here's the 4 archive centres on a map, just to show that the geographical area that we're covering. The mission statement for the service is to preserve, conserve and make accessible archive collections for the whole of the Highlands. And so we give access to people for documentary resources of about 700 years. Our oldest document dates from 1299, and that comes right through to documents that were created in the last few weeks by the Highland Council or by members of Highland communities. We have a family history centre, which I'll come on to in a second, a conservation studio for repairing the documents that we look after, and we run a wide range of events and open days and exhibitions and all sorts of things through the year, and a lot of that, of course, has had to go digital this year, which I'll touch on in a second. We also run and develop the Ambala Digital Archive from within the service. So some of you may be familiar with that. It's a website that comprises digitised documents of our collections, but also of a range of independent museums and families. So I mentioned that we do one-to-one consultations with family history staff. This is again something that we've, through necessity, has turned out to be a good thing, that we've started to move those online. So if people can email or can Skype, and we can do a consultation that way. We're really lucky to have a conservation department. Most archives don't have this. Again, it's a luxury of us having the new buildings. And this means that we're able to repair our own documents, but also that documents can come to us. We can do external conservation work, which is really great. It's the only studio in the north of Scotland.
Great.
We've got a really diverse outreach programme, so we do talks and all sorts of things. I was saying to Pauline just before I came on that I've spoken with STWIs previously, and I'm quite gutted this time that there's no cake involved, which is a sadness, but I might go down and have cake afterwards. But yes, we run all sorts of talks and events, school projects, freshers fairs, things like that. So as I mentioned, there are some of the young people coming in to do research into the documents. They do them sometimes for particular history themes like Jacobites or the First World War, but also they use them as the documents as inspiration for writing stories or creating artwork, or just finding out about people's lives in the past and how they compare to their life now. And I mentioned that a lot of this has had to go online recently. So we've got online exhibitions. For instance, on the bottom left-hand side, you can see one that our Nucleus Archive did about atomic housing and the transformation of Dounreay and Thurso. Doors Open Day, which we would normally do and have a lot of people in September, had to move online this year. So all those interviews with staff are digitised and available online. And then the series that I've been running across Facebook and YouTube is all digital engagement. I think we're on to the 59th one of those now, which is sort of half-hour talk about a different subject within our collections. Okay, so just something about some of the collections that we hold. There are records that are held in all the offices. So for instance, we all hold census records and old parish registers that are really great for people researching their family history. So you can find out about an area or an ancestor. We all hold property records. So the one at the top is a valuation roll. Really, really a fabulous resource. They're our most commonly used resource, and they list properties, who the owner was, who the tenant was, each year from the 1850s through to the 1980s. At the bottom there, you can see 2 maps of Golspie. We have, in the Highland Archive Centre alone, where I'm based in Inverness, we have 10,000 maps. But we have maps in all of our offices, first and second editions from the 1800s and 1900s, that can really show how the land mass has changed and how the communities have changed. We all hold education records. So things like the admission register you see on the left-hand side there from Embo in Sutherland. And this is every child's admission into a local school. And these give you details about the child's name, their parent and guardian's name, which school they went to previously, which school they went on to. On the right-hand side is a school logbook, and we have about 700 of these for different Highland schools. And these are the diaries written by the head teachers, usually once a week. And that example there from 1918 talks about the vast preparations made by the American naval authorities in the fields adjoining the schools. This is from Merkinch in Inverness. And it's talking about how the American Navy built a base up in Inverness and how hard it was to control the children because they were so distracted, pressed up at the window watching all the American sailors going past. But you can get all these snippets of information from these school records. We all hold poor relief records, and these are records that show people at a difficult time in their life and people who have had to claim for help from the system, if you know what I mean. You can't see me doing inverted commas, but that's what I'm doing. People entering into the system and looking for support to get through a hard time for one reason or another. The example that is up there on the screen is a girl called Flora Mackenzie from Dorney in Ardshieldich, and she's aged 28, and it says that she's partially disabled because she's burdened with a young child. Interesting terminology that you come across in these, burdened with a child. And so she's listed as being partially disabled because of that. It means she's, her ability to work and earn money is limited. And I don't know if you can quite see on that screen, but it records that her only means of income is gathering whelks on the seashore. And this is from 1903. So comparatively speaking, it's not that long ago.
No.
We hold police records. So this is a great example from Arisaig of a man serving in, this is his record and defaulters book. So this is where all the staff of the police are listed. And it gives great information. And this sounds like a strange thing to say, but if you have anybody in the police, in the what were called the lunatic asylum records, in the poor relief system, any of these kind of system institutional records will give you details of a person that you might never be able to get in any other way. So for instance, there, this entry is for William MacDonald, 1862, and it describes him as 28 years old, blue eyes, fresh complexion, 5'11", dark hair, all sorts of things that you just probably wouldn't find anywhere else if these records didn't exist. So that's a little bit about the records that all of us hold. And then what I wanted to do was just tell you something about some of the highlight collections from each office. The nature of the service is that we all hold these kind of records and types in common, but that we all take in records from churches or local clubs. We have SWI records that relate to each individual area. Sporting clubs, things like that, family and estate records that are discrete to each office. And so I wanted to just tell you something about some of the highlight collections that we hold in each one. So we're going to start at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, partly because I just love this picture. I don't know if you can really see the colour on it. It's absolutely glorious. It's a purple sky. So one of the big collections that we hold at the Highland Archive Centre are the Highland Health Board records. So these are historic health records that we hold on behalf of NHS Highland. There are, as there are with many of the record types I've talked about, there's a closure period on this. So these records, patient records, are closed for 100 years. So nobody will ever be able to see those within a 100-year period, unless they have very specific circumstances. But One thing I wanted to pull out of this to show you was these records that relate to the Highlands and Islands Medical Service. I think sometimes now it's a little bit forgotten, which is such a shame. The Highlands and Islands Medical Service was established in 1912 because there had been a law passed around insurance in 1911, but it was realised that a lot of the crofters and cotters were excluded from this National Insurance Act, and so there was a medical service committee set up to investigate what could be done about this. And the gentleman seated on the left-hand side is Sir John Dewar of Dewar's Whisky fame. And he was the chair of the committee who went around the Highlands interviewing people and asking them about their experiences of health and healthcare. And what he found, and the committee found, was so shocking that the report they wrote gave examples of people still believing that if you buried a cockerel under your doorstep, you could prevent epilepsy, or saying that in some of the remoter or some of the further afield islands, that the people would rather raise cattle than raise children because there was food and money to be got out of cattle. And these sorts of things were so shocking at the time that the Highlands and Islands Medical Service was set up to remedy that and to make a healthcare system that worked for the very diverse nature of the Highlands and Islands. And that was seen to be the forerunner of the NHS. And so several years later, there was a committee report into that Highlands and Islands Medical Service, and that was what the NHS structure was based on. So it deserves to be widely remembered. And also within those Highland Health Board records, we have the records of Craigdenane, what was known at the time as the 3rd District Lunatic Asylum. These records are absolutely fascinating, and they don't paint the picture that some people would expect. The asylum opened in 1864. It was very forward looking. They had a football team, a shinty team, an orchestra, and they encouraged the patients to get into a routine and have some work to do within the asylum and to take part in these kind of extracurricular activities. And it was very forward looking at the time. And we hold the registers, the case books, the case notes, and the warrants that took people into that asylum. But it's a very, very interesting and much more compassionate collection than I think sometimes people would anticipate. I mentioned family and estate and business collections. So just some examples of those on this screen. On the left-hand side is an order for timber for constructing the Caledonian Canal, and it's signed by Thomas Telford. In the middle is a Customs and Excise report for ships registered at Inverness in the 1780s. One of the things I absolutely love about the Customs and Excise collection, which I'm aware makes me sound very boring, but one of the things I love about this collection is the beautiful names of the ships. The ships are called things like Free and Easy and Land of Plenty and things like that you can picture them sailing off and having adventures. And I'm sure it wasn't in any way that romantic, but it's the names are beautiful. And then on the right hand side, an image of a steam train passing over the Culloden Moor Viaduct. And these pictures of steam trains, whenever we share them, are always well loved. Some further examples of family and estate and business collections. On the left hand side is an extract from a diary from a 10-year-old boy. I did a talk on Malcolm Blaine as part of my Learn with Lorna series, and it's quite extraordinary how many people it's touched. People have emailed and been in touch with me. We hold about 10 diaries from this boy when he was about 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and they're full of detail, they're full of stories and excitement and all his adventures. So he draws maps. You can see there he's drawn the Murray Firth and Fort George, and he draws all the routes. He lived down in the south coast of England and holidayed in Nairn, and every holidays they would travel up, and he drew all the train journey all the way up to Inverness, every stop and how long they stopped at each station. And this is at the turn of the century. This one I think is 1902, and he's just the most extraordinary little boy. And he died in the First World War in his 20s, and it's particularly poignant given how much life he's pushed into these diaries as a child. And you just think, my word, what would you have achieved if you had been allowed to get to real adulthood and live a full life?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the main things I absolutely love about working with archives, is that these are real people's stories. You know, these are not dry and dusty, boring documents. These are things about life and experiences and heartbreak and, you know, all sorts of powerful emotions. And that's a great one to use with children, because it's a 10-year-old child. And then when you can convey his death in the First World War, then the whole concept of the war becomes a little bit more manageable for people. I think for young people, if they've got their head around one person that they know who served. The bottom document there is another favourite of mine, because it's written in 1775. So, you know, a turbulent point in history as America was breaking away from British control. And the bottom document says, the spirit of immigration to America still continues in the Highlands, and it's daily spreading and gaining strength. Many hundreds are going over this year from the Aird, Urquhart, Glenmorrison, Glengarry, Kintail, and other parts, besides many in the south. And it's just one paragraph from a letter that shows a contemporary account of something that we now know, you know, happened in such volume, and that very tumultuous time in our history, and it's one person's account of it. The one on the right hand side I love, just purely for the look of it. It's a charter from 1542, and it's just very beautiful with all those seals still intact. It's a land transfer document, so it's someone's signing land over to somebody else, and it's just, as well as the content, it's a beautiful aesthetic document. It's lovely to look at.
Yeah.
So Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, arguably the nicest of our views, looking out over the water. Some of the collections we hold, this is an example from the West Highland Museum papers. So the West Highland Museum in Fort William, they hold obviously their object collections, but we hold their documentary collections for them, because we have the right conditions to look after the documents. And I love this. This is from 1654. It's a letter from William Brain, who was the governor of the Fort of Inverlochy, and he's writing to Oliver Cromwell. And it's just one of those things that, you know, Oliver Cromwell is a name you've heard all your life, and to work in a job where you can put your hand on these things and have that real tangible connection with someone who, you know, someone who wrote all those years ago to Oliver Cromwell is quite extraordinary. And he's writing, asking for supplies to be sent, and just saying how hard it will be if they don't get the supplies that they need, because they would be forced to go to London to get them. Another example from the West Highland Museum papers. This is a list of prisoners who were taken at Leith and Musselburgh and in other places following the 1715 Jacobite uprising. I'm involved in a lot of events this week, and I'm speaking at an event on Friday night about the Battle of Culloden. And again, it's an amazing thing to put your hand on. You know about these events. If you've grown up in Scotland, you probably have had some awareness of these things, but these documents that list the prisoners, it makes it very real if you can read the names of the people who were taken after these battles. Sticking to the kind of Jacobite theme for a moment, one of our big and amazing collections in Lochaber Archive Centre is the Cameron of Lochiel collection. So these are the family and estate papers of the Camerons of Lochiel, and there are all sorts of diverse things in that collection. But this is one of my absolute favourites, because I use this a lot with children. They're Jacobite coded ciphers, so the Jacobites could write to each other in code without being caught talking about the risings. And I love that this has survived and come down to us. The one on the right hand side says England is our house, London is Mr. Crammond's house, the House of Lords is Mr. Crammond, and there's all of these different words and what their code words will be. The Highlands is described as Mr. Morrison, and the Highlanders described as his tenants. So if at any point they were writing about what was happening in the Highlands, then they would talk about what was happening to Mr. Morrison and his tenants. And Inverness, they are described as Mr. Morrison's eldest daughter. I love that they exist, and they're great for inspiring fun in young people. When you go, you know, you say this is how scary the situation was, that they needed to write in secret messages to each other, and that is I think is something that can really fire the imagination. This is a letter from the Earl of Mar talking about taking command of the Jacobite army in 1715 and calling out all the Highland chiefs to take up arms in defence of King James. He's just described it as King James the Eighth. He never got that title because he didn't ever succeed to the throne, but the Jacobites referred to him as King James the Eighth. And again, just that, the fact that these documents exist and a contemporary evidence of something that was such a tumultuous and long-lasting, an event that had such a long-lasting legacy for the country. Another example from that collection is a letter from Prince James Edward Stuart. So that's the Old Pretender, Bonnie Prince Charlie's father, written in 1720 and talking about the Jacobite risings. And then much more up to date within that collection, this is a letter from 1914 from the Cameron of Lochiel collection, talking about written by Donald Cameron, written to his wife Hermione. Both Donald and his brother Alan served in the First World War. One of them survived and one of them didn't. And he's talking, this is the one who survived, writing back to his wife, talking about the death of his brother and saying that he's seen a newspaper report that suggests that Alan was only wounded at Versailles and not killed. And he said, I've got on at once to the War Office. I'm trying to find out the truth. He says, but I fear that this is unfounded. And he says, I just so much hope that Alan's wife doesn't read this newspaper report and get false hope that Alan's going to come home, because I don't think he is. And it's just, again, it's such a powerful letter. If you put yourself in those shoes and imagine that's him dealing with the loss of his brother, with all that he also has been through in the First World War, and that concern of, I just hope his wife doesn't read this and get up hope. It's a powerful letter, I think. Skye and Loch Alsh Archive Centre, one of the things that we have here that's particularly interesting and unusual is a huge photographic collection. So this is the Duncan Macpherson collection. And Duncan Macpherson was a chemist in Kyle of Loch Alsh, so you can see his shop there on the left-hand side. And he was a prolific photographer. He supplied photographic supplies in his chemist, but also he just went about the Highlands taking photos, went about Skye and Loch Alsh, documenting life and the sort of things that were happening around him. That's him on the right-hand side in his chemist with all those beautiful bottles that I aspire to have a collection of one day, but can't afford yet. In the middle picture is his two children. And again, the daughter went on to become a teacher, but the son died in the war. These are some of the photos that he's taken, and you can just see on the bottom right-hand side there that the Black House. So something very traditional. On the left-hand side, recording events of moment in the town, and this is in Portree, I think, and you can see there the troops in the photo. And then on the top, just local communities, local groups. This is a travellers group. So just going around recording things that otherwise we might not have any reference to. Another interesting collection in Skye is the Waternish Estate collection. This is an example of the rentals book from it for the 1830s. We work a lot, as you might imagine, with people who want to trace their family history and who get in touch with us to find out, do we have any reference to a particular person in a particular place? And rental books are great for this. This just shows where they're living, how much rent they're paying. But the Waternish Estate collection also has some great photos in, and you can see there the one on the left-hand side of estate workers working in the hay. And that fantastic photo on the right-hand side of that is a woman you wouldn't mess with. I mean, she looks like she is in charge of everything that is around her. But it's just those beautiful photos of character and snapshots of lives. And then finally, Nucleus, Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick. And as I say, a beautiful, stunning building. Some examples from this one are the Wick Harbour Masters records. These are a fantastic collection. Wick was such a huge and busy and substantial herring port, as you can see from the right-hand side. And this Harbour Masters records collection shows There's logbooks, there's things talking about the trawler riots, about the War of the Orange, all sorts of contemporary takes on things that happened in the town and in the surrounding area. Really interesting set of records. And another big collection in Nucleus is the Sinclair MacDonald's Architects collection. He is fantastically named Barbaritus Sinclair MacDonald. And he trained under Alexander Ross, who some of you may have heard of, a very prolific Highland architect. And among the things that he did, or that the Sinclair MacDonald architect practice did, was on the left-hand side the refurbishment of the Castle of May for the Queen Mother, and on the right-hand side the development of housing in Thurso. So all ends of the spectrum, but it's a fantastic collection of architects' drawings and plans. I mentioned that we also run Ambala from within the Highland Archive Service as well, so I thought I would round off just with a couple of pictures from within from the Ambala collections. The one on the top left-hand side, you know, I mentioned in 1903 with the lady who was gathering whelks on the seashore, and that being really quite recent. That photo of the top left-hand side is from 1910 in Cromarty, which I find quite striking, really. And that's just about, you know, just before the Dewar report went out, the commission into the Highlands and Islands Medical Service. And you can see why an act that covered Edinburgh and Glasgow maybe in 1910 would be dealing with a very different set of circumstances in the Highlands and a very, very different way of life, and a lot of people with not the same amount of money. And on the right-hand side, one of Gordon Shannon's photographs, and again, a collection of photographs of travellers, and it's just a particularly evocative, beautiful picture. I think that one, it would make a lovely drawing. It's just a beautiful moment captured. On the bottom, you can see a photograph that's called The Snow Kids. And this was 3, I think, friends, possibly siblings, I would need to check that, but Ian, Sheila and Angus, and taken in the 1950s. And when Ambala was launched, there was a kind of campaign to try and track down some of the people who had been involved in these, who were featuring in these early photos. And so there they are in 2003. Fortunately, this time not throwing snow on Sheila's head, which I'm sure she was grateful for. I'm going to stop talking. I'm suitably impressed that I've kept that to bang on half an hour, which is very unlike me.
That's great.
If you do want to know any more about the service or what we do, or have a look at collections, we're all the offices are on Facebook and Twitter, but we post regularly pictures from our collections and stories from within the records. So if you're able to have a look on there, then please do. But in the meantime, I will stop sharing my screen and resume my smile.
Well done, Lorna. That was great. That was great. Don't think we've quite got you back in a picture yet. Hang on a sec.
A wasted smile.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, you're there. Thanks very much, Lorna. That was fabulous. That's fabulous. It's very interesting. I've personally accessed the archives a little because I used to work in newspapers in Inverness, and I know and I printed quite a lot of the Ambali pictures in a magazine I did and things like that, and also the Courier did a page every week. The Inverness Courier did a page with a picture from Ambali archive to see if people would recognise or knew anything and could name anyone in the pictures, which is a really interesting connection, isn't it? It's an interesting connection to history to make sure.
We learn a lot. You know, we share a lot of knowledge, and we learn a lot of knowledge from the people who use our collections. You know, we often people will come in with their memories or their knowledge of a person who's in a photo, or their own experience of the shop that we've got the records for, or things like that. And that really all adds to what you know about a collection.
Yes, yeah. So
Can I ask a question?
I'm going to throw it open to everyone now. If you have a question, can you just say Pauline, and then I'll come to you guys, because just so
Pauline.
Who's that?
This is Paula.
Paula, hello, Paula. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good.
Doing good.
Well, nice to see you, Paula.
Yeah, you too.
Paula, you're in Oregon, yeah?
Yes, I am.
Oregon in the States, great.
I love it when you have 7 o'clock meetings because then I up at 6 in the morning.
Yeah.
I do my Learn with Lorna series on Facebook on 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning, and I have people who follow from different countries, and one person from New Zealand always says it's the last thing before I do. Should I go to bed with a glass of wine? And I watch you, and then I go to bed.
Oh.
So my question is, how much of the collections are digitized?
Well, in a way, we're luckier than many because we have the website. Ambala means we've got a platform to have digital collections, but I mean the vast majority is not. For a couple of reasons. One is that the cost would be so prohibitive to do. There are so many several millions of items. So that's one thing. But the other one is that there's a kind of wariness about how much to digitize when we don't know what technology will be available in the future. If we invest our kind of time and money in preserving the originals, then we know they can be accessed. But it's interesting. I had a conversation with a child about that once, who said to me, "Why don't you photocopy everything?" Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, then I will have 2 paper copies of everything. But yes, so we do digitize. We're probably fortunate to be able to digitize more than some other services do because we've got the platform. And the other thing we do is we do a remote inquiry service. So if there's any particular documents that people want to see, then we can digitize them and send them.
So then do you have like indexes so that?
We do. So our catalogues are available on our website. So you can have a look at the website. I can send Pauline a link through to that if it's something that's of use to anybody. But so you can then search through the collections on our website and tell us what you're interested in, and we can scan them and get them to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, and you know, a good starting point for anyone is probably the Ambali collection, because you can see the pictures as you search through. You can see all the pictures, and that then kind of leads you on to other things, doesn't it?
It's also it's a lovely website to browse through, and I say that as, you know, someone who works with it, but there's so much content on there, and it's from our collections at the Highland Archives Service, but also Gairloch Museum is on there, or typical. There's dozens of contributors, and they've all gone out of my head. But you know what I mean. There are lots and lots of different other organisations. So if there's a particular subject or area you're interested in, there will probably be something there to start you off looking at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Paula. Thanks for that question. I've got a question from Alex now. Alex Eaton. Hi, Alex. Nice to see you again, Alex.
Hello there.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you, and you too. Hello, Lorna.
Hello.
A super talk. Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting. Just 2 things I was going to say. Number one is the closure period of 100 years. Now, I suppose that would also apply for things like the police records and the poor relief records, would it, as well as the health records? So
the 100-year closure applies to school admission registers. Not all school collections, but school admission, because they have parents' names, dates of birth, things like that in. Health board records for patients are 100 years, for staff are 75. Poor relief is 100 years. And what was the other one you asked me? Police. Police are 75, I think, 75 for police. But it's interesting, it's funny, because 100 years seems like such a long time when you say it to people, but then if that still takes you to 1921,
I know,
you know, so it's still within really quite recent memory, and I think that's one of the reasons that we do it. And particularly, it's relevant everywhere, but particularly in the Highlands, where those communities often haven't changed that much in that time. That's quite a short space of time for people to you know, suddenly know that someone was in the asylum or in the poor relief system, or
yes, I mean, my own mum was born in 21, so I know exactly what you mean.
Exactly.
It's very, very recent history, really.
Exactly.
Comparatively. The other thing I was going to say, you touched upon the child asking why you didn't photocopy everything. Well, by coincidence, I used to be the curator of Alpol Museum.
Oh, did you?
Years gone by. And
there's an example that we've got items from.
I think we were the first museum that actually had a link with you with our photographic archive.
Okay,
and that was a long time ago now. But anyway, I was just going to say that it was part of our service level agreement with various funders and things in those days that everything, all the paper archive, had to be copied with the intention of having the originals, and then a copy which was kept off site, so that in the event of fire or anything like that, you would. So it did, and it still does. It's sort of relevant in some circumstances.
Absolutely.
Obviously, a tiny little independent museum we couldn't afford, and there wasn't such a thing as digitalization in those days. But so we've done that. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documents we photocopied, religiously, and put them all up in the museum stores. So he wasn't far wrong.
No, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, and I think one of the things is, as the service grows and grows, it becomes harder and harder to achieve that.
Yes.
When you stand, if you compare that first picture of Inverness Library when the collections were there to the 4 buildings now, I think that the strong rooms at Nucleus there are 8 strong rooms, and they're each the size of 4 badminton courts, if I remember correctly. So it becomes less and less and less possible to stay on top of that. But one thing, it's interesting in that there's still a similar problem that we deal with, which is when we're accessioning digital records, born digital records, which is a whole other debate we can have for the next few hours. But that's what we do with those digital records. We keep one copy in this building and one copy somewhere else in case the hard drive gets corrupted. So that the theory behind it carries on.
Yes, of course. Are the the strong rooms and things that are in place now in all the various hubs you have, are they all fireproof?
They are. They're all fireproofed. They're all temperature controlled, and they've all got these really fab systems where they've got tiny little holes in the ceiling, and every 5 seconds they test the air to look for dust particles or changes in temperature. So it triggers a pre-fire warning and immediately calls the fire brigade. And that would happen well before it became a fire. She says, desperately hoping it worked. But yes, it should do. And then it's interesting. So when the buildings were built, there was a decision taken not to put sprinklers in case they went off accidentally and caused damage. But quite a lot of other archives, I believe it was in Italy that this happened, that they have gas suppressant systems. So the system closes, the doors lock, and the gas falls from the ceiling and suppresses any fire. But what happened, and as I say, I believe it was in Italy, was that 2 archivists, when the gas suppressant system triggered, couldn't get to the door in time. And I think that there were a couple of archivists who lost their lives because of that, because they weren't able to get out in time. And it's that balance between going, yes, the records are absolutely paramount, but second to human life. So
yes. Well, thank you very much.
But no, there's all sorts of things to protect them.
Good. That's great to hear. Thank you very much indeed. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Irene, you've got a question, Irene, yeah?
Yes, that was a fascinating talk, and what an interesting job you have.
Yes.
Well, I have a wonderful job.
Yes, absolutely. It sounds amazing. Who funds you, Lorna? Where do your funds come from?
So we're part of High Life Highland, which is an arm's length organisation from the Highland Council. So High Life Highland runs culture and leisure services on behalf of the council. So probably, I couldn't give you an exact percentage now, but some percentage of the funding will come from the Highland Council, and the rest of it comes from donations and income generation where we can. So our main things, we would do that for our family history research, but also our external conservation work. The fact that we kind of invested in those studios and spaces means that we can do commissioned work for other services, and that's been a great thing.
And what about your background? I mean, what did you do? Did you go to university? Did you do a special course or anything?
Well, I did go to university, but it hasn't been directly part of getting the job. So
right.
when I was at Edinburgh University, I did English language and linguistics, which my dad famously on my way out, last thing he said to me was, "You're never going to get a job with that. Like, that's not a vocational degree. Are you sure you don't want to be a plumber? You'll always have work if you're a plumber." And so and then I applied in 2014 to be an archive assistant, and so I was the person kind of bringing the documents out from the strong room to anybody who wanted to look at them, and I did that for 2 years. But there was no, having a degree wasn't a prerequisite of that job.
No.
And then in 2017, I think, I went on and applied for this kind of secondary role, and I've done that ever since.
Fantastic. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
The main basis of it is that I'm just a bit of a story lover, and
right, okay.
what I hope to get across to people, and anytime I do anything, is that the documents are not boring. You know, the documents are full of people's lives.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen, have you got a question for Lorna?
I have, Pauline. Thank you very much. In actual fact, I had a couple of questions, but the lady Irene before me, one of my questions was, how would you get a career into archives, whether it would be through history or, as you say,
I can
English
answer that slightly differently, though.
Oh, right.
If it would be useful to, I can answer that slightly differently. So, I mean, my degree actually has come in very useful, because one of the things I did was paleography in Old English and Middle English, and so that's come in as a practical skill, very useful for reading documents. But that's just as an aside. But I'm not an archivist, so to become an archivist, there is a more recognisable career route, and that is taking any undergraduate degree and then following that by a postgraduate qualification in archives and records management. And if there's someone in particular who needs, you know, if you have someone who wants to know that information, the best place to look would be the Archive and Record Association website. And there's information there on that qualification to become an archivist.
Thank you very much. And my second question was about one of your slides, the letter to Oliver Cromwell asking for provisions to be sent. Is that a style of Old English that it's written in, or was it a translation from the Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic, into English for Oliver Cromwell? Would you know? But the whole presentation, I have to say, is first class and so enjoyable. It's really interesting. Thank you very much.
You. I'm really glad. I think it would be written in English. I would think that the people in those kind of positions who are dealing with the British government or the English government at the time would be English speakers. So I think it would be a document written in English. But you can see, I'm looking at it. Sorry, that's not super helpful. So things like, it says the men of war which are ordered, and it's WCH. So there's abbreviations like that in there that you'll see. And there will be an element of Scots words creeping in as well. And yes, and you can certainly see where all the spellings have changed and so on. Quite often for which you'll see QU as well, QUCH.
So it's very interesting.
Oh, it's marvellous. Marvellous. But yes,
thank you very much.
I don't know for sure, but my guess would be it would be written in English originally.
Thank you, Lorna. Lovely. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks. Lorna, and also I'm sure a lot of people know, but Cromwell landed in Inverness, didn't he? Because there's a
we have some
Cromwell in Inverness.
Interesting connections to Cromwell in Inverness, and also one that I didn't realise, because I spend my every single day learning something new. Was I was giving a talk a few weeks ago as part of the Learn Lorna series about castles in the Highlands, and I hadn't realised that Sinclair Garnigo, right on the north coast, was also taken over by Cromwell troops. So right up above Wick. So yes, we're not quite the far away remote outpost that people think we are sometimes.
Great. Eileen, you've got a question, yeah?
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Thank you very much, Lorna. It's been a lovely talk and very informative. One point I want to make is that I actually live where Thomas Telford was born.
Oh, really?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, he was born just outside Langham. So, yeah.
Oh, lovely part of the world.
Yeah, it is. It is. My question is quite simply, how do we access Learn with Lorna?
You can get that on our Facebook page or on the High Life Highland YouTube channel. So
Okay.
I do it live on Facebook every Thursday morning, and it goes out. We have 4 archive, each of the archive centres have their own Facebook page, but it goes out across all 4 of them live. And then I upload it onto YouTube afterwards.
So that's the Highland Archive Facebook page.
Yep.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. That's grand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. That's great. Now let's see. Are there any more questions? Anyone?
Can I just butt in? My father was the Director of Education for Highland Region.
Oh, really?
From the 60s through the 70s to the 80s.
Okay.
And he was a great man of education, as you can imagine. So we were imbued with a sense of our own history. So I've known about archives since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. And we have a large family through the Highlands and Islands, and we actually have a young man who holds our own family archives. But I can imagine in the fullness of time that may come to you.
Well, I will be delighted on behalf of the whole service.
Well, it's amazing because you were talking about Cameron of Lochiel, and I knew his brother Alan and his wife many, many years ago living in the Black Isle. And it just makes me realise what a small world it is.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. That's lovely to hear, and certainly we will have references and records to do with your father then in our collections. There'll be no doubt at all. But yes, by all means, it's a balance of striking of knowing that people want to look after their own family collections because they're personal and important and precious to them, but making people know that we're here and that if at some point they want to come to us, they will be looked after and treasured.
Thank you, Heather. That's great. And are your dogs in the archives, Heather? Because Heather's got a beautiful.
No, they're right at the moment. They're both crashed out. They've had a busy day, so they're exhausted.
Thought you might have had their family tree in as well, Heather.
Now there's a thought. Yes.
we do have, this is going to sound like unbelievable that this has come up in conversation, but we do have some references to dogs' family trees in this.
Oh, wow. Oh,
purely because of the first golden retrievers being bred in the Highlands.
Ah, yes, of course.
So Lord Tweedmouth.
Yeah.
So we have some photos of the first golden retrievers.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's a link no one thought we would make tonight.
No.
Mine are Bernese mountain dogs. They weigh 7.5 stone each.
Beautiful.
So they're bit of a handful though.
You love them, really.
I love them. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather. Thank you. Talking about dogs. And do you have any, Lorna? Do you have any? In Fort George, in the Seaforth Highlanders Museum, they have in Fort George itself, they have the pet cemetery for the mascots. Do you have records for that as well, or is it just in Fort George those records?
We don't have records for that. I would guess if the records survive, they'll survive in the Highlanders Museum collection.
Yeah. I just wondered.
Yeah, I'm not
on that animal tip,
Yeah, absolutely. Let's carry on the route.
Yes.
No, I would imagine that they would be kept within their collections at the Highlanders Museum.
I have another question, but I don't want to hog it if anyone else has any questions. My question is about the ships and whether you could see whether there were slave trading with slaves coming into Inverness. I know that they came into other parts of Scotland. So,
well, those particular ships registers I showed are too late for that. Generally speaking, the customs and excise records are a bit late for that. We do have references to the slave trade and this not so much the trade in people, but in the revenue generated by the slave plantations is certainly reflected in our collections. In 2015, we hosted a big conference to do with that, and I think we were all quite taken aback when we started really delving to look for it, how much was there. The likes of the Royal Northern Infirmary, Tane Royal Academy, Inverness Royal Academy, all of those big institutions, you can see within their early founding records that money is being remitted from the Caribbean for that. One particular collection that is very powerful and emotive on this subject, and if you do want to go back and look at some of the talks I've done a talk specifically on this subject, which will be available on our YouTube channel if you want to have a look at it. It's the collection, it's part of the Fraser Tytler collection, which is my absolute favorite collection. It's like naming a child, I know that, but it is my one of my favorite collections, and there's some letters in there from a lady called Elizabeth McDermott, who was what was called at the time a free black woman in Jamaica. And she had a relationship with a gentleman called George Grant from Forres. They had 4 illegitimate children, and he brought them gradually over to Scotland to be educated. And she never saw them again, as far as we're aware. And there are letters of hers in the collection which are very, very touching. She writes to him at one point saying, I've been waiting and waiting for you to come back, and it's just occurring to me that you're not coming back, and I don't know when I'm going to see, or if I'll see my children again. And she says, I can hardly write this letter anymore for the tears in my eyes, because she said it's bringing back so many past happinesses that are now gone from me. It's quite an extraordinary set of letters, and I'm so delighted that they exist and that they were kept, because my feeling is it's a voice that wouldn't have been heard that much, and still isn't heard that much. So I'm very, very glad that those still exist.
Amazing. And Alex, I'm sure you've got lots of stories similar to that from the Hector. because the Hector left from the clearances, the Hector left, and the Hector is now being restored in Canada, isn't it?
Well, it's a rebuild. It's not the original, obviously, but the rebuild that was done at the time of the bicentenary, it's sort of it deteriorated quite a bit, but they're now doing it up again. So I think it's going to be quite nicely presented in future, like most of these things, capital funding, great, revenue funding to continue the process.
It's difficult.
The usual thing. But I think, there has been, just in the nick of time, I believe that there's been quite a lot of interest and there's a lot of work going on. But we maintained that we probably saw a descendant of every single person who went on the Hector in the museum. They all flocked across when the museum was founded. The museum was actually founded as a result of a bicentenary exhibition in the village in 1988, because it was the bicentenary of the village, and the Hector had only gone away 5 years previous. So it all tied in beautifully. But yeah, and I mean the baby that was born on board, descendants came and all this sort of thing, and we actually had we still have a lady staying in the village who was the descendant of the Reverend McGregor, who actually went out and became the minister of the people who had gone from this area. So that there have been lots of links, and it's been so interesting, to meet these people and to be able to help them, with their genealogy and things, because they didn't all come. Sorry.
No, I'm rudely interrupting you.
No, not at all. I was just going to say quickly, they weren't all from this parish. They'd come from all over the place. There were people from Bewley, there are people from Wick. There seemed to be quite a big conglomeration of people who actually embarked from Lochbroom, and I think they called in at Greenock and other places as well. So, it wasn't just people from round here. And there was one family who was still here in great numbers, who actually, the wife was going to give birth, and so she gave birth in Ullapool, and they missed the Hector, and they're still here, you know. So there's all sorts of funny little tales like that, you know. So it's been absolutely super. Anyway, I'll hand back to you.
I was just going to say, it gives you any dealing with history gives you a very long sense of perspective, I think, and where we fit in a long time scale, and you can look forwards and backwards. I think that's a good skill to have that comes out of working with history in the historical documents or objects.
Yes. Thank you. I think, Alex, we might get you on to talk about Ullapool history for one. That would be good, yeah.
Well, yes, that would be grand. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. So, Lorna, if I'll just make sure no one else has any questions, and then we can. I'm sure you're very busy this week, as you say, because I used to work at Culloden, so I know the amount of interest in Culloden, and from all sorts of different areas. So.
It is a particularly busy week.
Yeah, what are you doing this week as part of that then?
So as part of that, tomorrow my Lorna will be on the Battle of Culloden, and then on Friday night, my colleague Anne Fraser and I, who's our family historian, she and I are doing a couple of hours session on Friday night where I'll look at the development of the risings across from sort of 1680s onwards, and then Anne will look at how those risings had an impact on particular families. So she picks 3 particular families and talks about what the rising meant for that family going forward. So those will be recorded.
It's very, very interesting, because families often sent one son to one side and one son to the other, just to make sure that we're, you know.
And it's interesting, you know, in our Inverness Town Council minutes for 1715, the town was garrisoned by the Jacobites. There was complete mayhem, and it's all recorded in the minutes. And then for the 45, there's nothing. They took the town council minutes, put them away in a tower, locked them in. You can just see them going, well, we're hedging our bets here because this could go badly wrong.
Yeah.
So it's interesting what's written and what's not written.
Yes. And the secrecy for the, as you said, for the letters and the cipher,
the code
secrecy,
things.
And
I think
secrecy for the
I think we sometimes forget the. I think
they painted themselves.
I think we sometimes forget the very real danger involved in supporting it, you know, and the consequences of ending up on the wrong side.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's been very interesting, Lorna. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to ask ladies to unmute, and then we can give you a round of applause and say thank you very much properly. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you've got a few new fans, Lorna. I think you'll be a few more faces in Facebook when you're on. So
I'm really glad. It was lovely to speak to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Good
Yeah.
night.
Bye. Bye. Good night. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Lorna. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well done. And I know it's a busy week, so I'm very grateful.
A pleasure.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Go and enjoy your evening. Lovely to see you, Paula. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.